Hello, friends, and welcome to Doug Reads with Friends. I'm Doug. In each episode of Doug Reads with Friends, a friend of mine picks a book, we both read that book, and then we sit down and we talk about the book, about ideas, and about our lives. The book brings us together, but the friendship is really the point of this. This podcast exists so I can stay connected to people I care about and make space for the kinds of meaningful conversations we don't always have time for. Thanks for joining us. On today's podcast, I am joined by Illinois State Senator Graciela Guzman. This is the first time I think I've had somebody with a big title on. Definitely the most famous person I've had on so far. I have known Graciela since she was a student and a posse scholar at Grinnell College, where I was working. Graciela and I got to know each other very, very well during her time at Grinnell. And then I have watched in awe and amazement as her career and her life has taken off since then. She worked for a long time in the healthcare policy space, trying to get more and more people access to healthcare in Chicago. And then recently, as she has become a politician and stepped into the role of being an Illinois state senator. Let's get into my conversation with Graciela Guzman about the book, The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. I want to start with kind of the Graciela that I knew at Grinnell and trace a little bit how we got from there to here. And so this is maybe a self-interested question because I think a lot about the value of post-graduation service work and inspiring who people are and who they become. Do I recall correctly that AmeriCorps was your first stop out of undergraduate?
Yeah, that was the first stop. I remember if we trace it all the way back, I had graduated and was applying to jobs all throughout the country. And a couple of the AmeriCorps jobs here in Chicago specifically spoke to me. And so, yeah, I was in AmeriCorps here with the Illinois Primary Healthcare Association. And that's how my entire trajectory around my career actually got started. So I got super lucky that I landed somewhere good and in a really great community. But yeah, that was AmeriCorps.
Can you talk a little bit about how that work either inspires what you do now as a state senator, or maybe something that you learned from that experience that you think about today as a state senator?
I think it did a couple of things for me. So in general, my origin story around healthcare policy had always been kind of this like life or death dynamic that had happened in my family, like who got to have health insurance because they had immigration status. So me, who got to have it because I was born here, and my grandfather and a lot of people in my family that didn't get to have it at all because they had been undocumented. And my grandfather in particular was one of my caregivers when I was a child and who helped raise me. Pancreatic cancer that moved super fast. And by the time that we were talking about it with his provider community, they were telling us, you can't pay, you don't have health insurance. Like there really isn't much that can happen. And so that experience I walked away with as a really formative experience and why I thought I wanted to be a doctor, because childhood Graciela was like, well, it's really simple. Like if you just become a doctor, then like you can help all these people, like you'll just see them. It'll be great. Like your clinic will be full. And that's what I thought I was going to do. And then I ended up in a clinic and I was like, I actually really don't like the medicine part of this
Which is a problem for being a doctor.
kind of a problem, but I really loved our patients and our patient community. I believed in like the mission. I knew that it was really important to fight for coverage. And I think it opened up my vantage point on all of these other ways that I could actually help people get in the door. Because I would sit in the wait room and I would ask patients, like, how did it go in there for you? And they would tell me, well, the doctor diagnosed me with something, but I can't pay for the prescriptions. Or they told me go be healthy, but the corner store doesn't really have fruits and vegetables. Or they told me, hey, I need to go walk around the block, but they don't know that I don't have sidewalks in my neighborhood. It really got me on this journey around our social determinants of health and kind of like everything outside of the clinic walls and hospital walls that really get to drive how we live and how healthy we are. And I think that has been this like journey of pulling policy and people to help make lives better. And that all got started by me learning that I really, really didn't like medicine. And I don't think it would have happened that way if I hadn't tried it out,
I have an idea in my head of what it is to be a state senator and what you do. Like, okay, like you go to Springfield and you debate and you pass laws and that type of thing. I'm guessing there's a lot of parts of it though that I have no clue, like, oh, that's involved with being a state senator. So what have you learned in this role and what has surprised you about this role?
I'd spent many, many years organizing big coalitions of organizations around people, around how we build people power to win big things. And, big things being healthcare most of the time. But why I say that to you is because I think one of the biggest findings for me is I think about Springfield as like one big mass organizing project. I have colleagues that really want to do things and I'm asking them to be brave. And then we get to come in and think about strategy and how we bring communities together to make this joint ask so that what feels really, really hard and daunting can feel possible. I've got folks that I call them lovingly, like, I'm dragging you to humanity. I'm reminding you that we have an obligation to people at all times, but especially in this moment. The organizing of it is like my base feature means that even when somebody's telling me like, no, this is not possible, it's not possible this year, you're not going to get it at all, my brain is fragmenting time. Like, oh no, you're telling me no this way, but there's a roof, there's another door, there's another window, there's a rule that can be changed, there's something that can happen in the process that, I can find to maneuver. But there's also this like time is stretching for me in these ways that I've like been surprised by, because sometimes I go, I may not win this by May, which is when our legislative season starts, but we could win it in 12 months, in 24 months, in 36 months. And so this kind of like, what do we need to do to get there? And something you always say, like, kind of like relishing the process. Like, I think I'm actually leaning into that a little bit more, because it can be really easy to fall into hope and despair if you don't win something right away. And for me, I've been losing a lot like my whole life. So I know, I know what it's like when you don't win it the first time and then you win it eventually and it's better for it. But I think those have been my two findings. But in terms of the core question that you asked me, what is my job? We pass a lot of policy. We do it with community members. We have a lot of community collaborative processes. And I think folks don't expect that a lot. One of my big pride points is how many pieces of legislation come from the sponsorship of community members that have come into our office and said, this is something that is hurting you right now, or an idea that I have. What do you think? So that collaborative process is exciting. We get to think a lot about what the future of our districts looks like and how we can use the state budget to do that. And that for me feels existential in a neighborhood like mine where most of my community is gentrifying. And so if I'm not really intentional about how I keep this district as home for people, they may not be here. So that always constantly feels like, what can we be doing with our youth? What can we be doing with violence prevention and other programs? And I think we don't often think about what role state has in getting to define how we define this home. And I think the other part that makes me really excited is that I'm getting to redefine government services. And so, yes, we do the traditional set of services that you would expect out of state government. Like if you have questions about your driver's license, about your insurance, about your unemployment, like all of those things, like we do well. But I think we're getting to redefine government services in a moment where I think folks are really saying, like, what else can you do specifically right now to ensure that people are safe, that they feel included, that they feel advocated for? And so I think that's led us on all kinds of journeys in this office, from mutual aid to rapid response to work around federal overreach, because I think this is the moment where we get to dig in and figure out like what else can we pull into this office so that our community feels well responded for.
One thing that strikes me as you're talking is that the Graciela that I know from Grinnell and that I adore from Grinnell is very self-effacing, doesn't like to talk about herself very much, will downplay her successes. You're a politician. You got to get people to vote for you. You got to get out and be like, vote for me. I'm the best. Here's why you need to support me. How do you balance those two things of kind of what I understand to be your nature versus like the demands of the job are like, if you want to keep your job, you got to go tell people you're awesome. How do you balance that?
I think of two big things. One, that is still all true. I still hate fundamentally talking about myself, but I think what has changed for me that specifically allowed for me to be in office was that There's so much in my life story that is the experience of hundreds, if not thousands, of people in my district. When I talk about being a renter, I talk about being daughter of immigrants, I talk about being first in my family to go to college in like a vantage point that not a lot of my colleagues in the legislature have. And it makes it even more important. I think I actually walk into Springfield not feeling smaller. I walk in like knowing that I've really got to own a vantage point, not just for me, but for other people that are looking for me to do so that aren't ever going to be able to step into Springfield. And so I think that moment has clicked for me overwhelmingly over the last couple of years that there's a responsibility that comes with what I've lived and what I want to do with it. So I think that's one part. And then I think the part that's been amazing throughout the campaign and just now getting to be in office is how loved I feel by this community for getting to be who I am. That they reward my bravery, my peeling of myself, like getting to share experiences, like folks that will call our office or write us or send me a text or see me at the Capitol or here, and they'll go, because you got to share that you were a survivor, or because you got to share that this had happened to you, I feel like I can do the same. Or because I saw you doing rapid response when ICE was here, I felt like I could do the same. And that's obviously not my goal. I want to produce like an environment where folks don't have to do those things, but it is something that I'm still processing to be able to be seen so wholly by a district that I love. And I think it is because I'm choosing to be as open as I can about who I am, quirks and all. I'm shy about this. I'm not shy about this. I'm getting to be like my most me externally as well. And so it's nice to not have to feel like there's like home Graciela and work Graciela. We're all just one now, and that's great.
You mentioned especially the ICE raids in Chicago earlier this year, a few months ago. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like, what your role was, what you learned from that experience?
Most of my first year was spent walking into a scenario where I knew what was going to be happening to my community. But the mass majority of my district is deeply immigrant. So we walked into the year knowing that there was a little bit of a target around our district, and that we had a responsibility to get organized. And so when things during Operation Blitz really started going, it felt much like the contours of the book that I know we'll talk about at some point, but really, really dark, really heavy. And it was just kind of like in the minutia of trying to do everything in our power to keep people safe. And I do think that a lot of those moments felt like this practice of constantly reflecting to people. And I would say it in all my remarks, and it's true. I see you. I will do everything in my power as a civilian to protect you, and I love you. And it had to be said because, people would break down crying on sidewalks, at stores, at schools, everywhere. Because when you face rubber bullets and tear gas and you have ICE at your door and you hear where they're at, you don't feel particularly loved or seen. And you don't know that you're ever going to feel loved or seen by your government again. And it felt that part about redefining governance, I think I've thought about all year. And I think really getting to be effusive about what our values are and what I'm refusing to compromise for this district, I think is something that our neighbors needed from me. And a lot of them have said, like, the preconditions for organizing are contingent upon how brave you feel to leave your home and to be able to extend your love for community to that level, right? When you have to face ICE and know that those situations may happen. So I know it felt like the right thing to do. I still absolutely know it was 100% the right thing to do. I'm really grateful that hundreds of neighbors across Chicago made the same decision. And I think that when everything is said and done now, it has taught us a lot about what I think community care can do, right? That where systems fail and where governance can fail, that community members can have each other's back, that sometimes they can even have their back in ways that are more thorough and can kind of like redraw what we think is possible in terms of service. And I think that there's an immediacy, right? That I couldn't really wait for guidance to come and tell me, Graciela, it's okay if you use state resources to help support your people. It was the other way around. They were like, you can't. And I was like, that's nice. Talk to you later. And a lot of that happened. And then our practices became a lot of my Senate colleagues' practices. And that, someone has to kind of go first sometimes and just try things out.
One thing that I'm thinking about as you're talking about this is that you have a very clear point of view. You know exactly what you believe. You know what your community is like. You know how to represent your community. And yet, every day when you're in Springfield, you go to work with people, some of whom are diametrically opposed to what you believe, who fully support the ICE raids in Chicago, who have depth of conviction that matches yours, but on a totally different viewpoint. How do you relate to them? How do you get along with them? If you do, what is it like to work with people who believe such diametrically opposed things to you?
I tend to think about those colleagues as projects. So I'm like, how long is our program and project gonna be? I think it really sometimes depends on how entrenched things have been. And I think I've learned to differentiate the person from topics sometimes because I've seen both, where I have colleagues that have said some of the most vile things possible to me and to my colleagues. And then we'll turn around and be like, well, those were the talking points that were drafted for me. Like, oh, okay, cute. I'm going to clock that and we're going to talk about it. And I think there's colleagues that over my 15 months or so that I've been in office, 16 months, really focusing on those longitudinal relationships. How did you get here? Why did you get here? Do you not have a lack of housing in your district too? Do you not have people that don't have jobs too? Like, help me understand what is going on for you. And then I actually learned that their districts and mine. Granted, how urban mine is, how deeply immigrant mine is might be different, but that they have a lot of the same concerns that I do. And, my hope is that it becomes less abrasive, less nutty. Some of the ideas that we're pushing, if they're able to relate to the fact that we're actually just like one district away from the same level of concerns. But it takes a lot of patience that sometimes I have. Sometimes I don't. I try to keep that patience for them, in part because I try to remember is we need to pass anything in the Senate, you need 30 votes. And so that point that I was saying at the top, like, who am I encouraging to be their best self today? Who am I encouraging to be patient? Who am I encouraging to be better or to be brave? And sometimes better or brave for them just means like take a walk. You can take a walk when this thing is happening, and that's beautiful. And wash up this, like, thank you so much. But that's what I try to keep in the back of my brain when there's some moments that I just want to like rage yell at something and remember that I really have to bring my light to bear. And I've actually discovered that they don't like when we do that because they really want sometimes those colleagues a reason to hate me or to say, oh, Graciela is like, you can't talk to her. You can't reason with her. I'm like, no, you can't say that. I brought you into what I see, what I feel, how I feel it. I've asked you about your family. I've asked you about your values. I've asked you about your district. I've really tried to get in there because if you really, really are going to be opposed, we're going to talk on substance, not on what you think is the substance. And so that's what I try to push myself to when I'm patient. When I'm not patient, we'll have a head to head debate in a committee and it's super cute. Not really, but that's that.
I want to ask about a different role of yours, which is
Yeah.
that you're a trustee of our alma mater, Grinnell College. I was mad enough that when Grinnell dropped Posse, I have not given money to Grinnell College since then, with one exception, which is that when you were named to the board of trustees, I made a donation to Grinnell College to encourage them in further in that direction. So how do you view the college differently now through the lens of a trustee than you did through a student eyes or then as an alum's eyes?
I think about this way for Grinnell because it changed my entire life and trajectory. I wouldn't have met you. You changed my life. There's a lot of people that I think at Grinnell that are now like my core family that I wouldn't have had. And then my first reaction back to Grinnell was actually very friction filled, where I was like, I'm going to come and tell you in your walls how I feel about y'all. And then they were like, okay. And it became this journey back to Grinnell, I think, out of a broader ultimate goal, how do we bring back Posse and other things that we really love that I believe should be at Grinnell. But I think also there's still students that actively need what we learned and our perspective and that orientation on campus right now. And I think that has been actually something that has been really personally fulfilling. That orientation, I'm not sure that I had as a student for sure. I wasn't thinking about like, what is the future solvency of this institution or the college or what does it mean to have generations of Grinnellians come forth in a similar orientation? I definitely was not thinking about that as a student. And for the most part, in my alumni journey, I was like, I think they're doing what they got to do for the most part. I'm sure we'll hear about it. It's fine. And then as a trustee, I think I get asked this often when we get asked to reconsider if we want to extend our terms or why we are coming back. And I mean this like full weight of my chest is when a Grinnellian is in a space. Like you feel it in how they speak, how they bring up their values. And so I've brought up this example for Chicago where oftentimes I will be in a room and someone will just say something and I'll go up to them afterwards and I'll be like, hey, can I just ask you the most random question? Do you know this town called Grinnell? And then they go, yeah, class of 1999, 89, 2013, 17. Like they'll start listing this off. And I'm like, these are the colleagues that I'm looking for in disruption. And there is something about Grinnell that cooks people that are very quizzical about not just how life works, but self-invested and community invested and how to change it. And I don't take that for granted. And so my best at stake right now is I don't know where this world is going, but I know where I want it to go. And I think we're going to need Grinnellians and that orientation of people that deeply care and love each other to change that. So we need to incubate more Grinnellians is kind of how I view that. And that's something that I think the trusteeship time has specifically brought out in me. Like, what can I do in service of Grinnellians that I think are doing excellent work, but have a lot to combat in this moment? It's a really tough time for many of us to do our work. And so how can we get some stuff out of their way? Is kind of how I view like the role of the trusteeship specific to Grinnellians that I hope will graduate and get to do their thing.
I can't get you out of here without asking you about singing because, oh man, for people who have not heard Graciela sing, you have missed out. Unbelievable voice. And you sang a lot at Grinnell from a cappella to classical music and everything in between. I know that you were leading a band for a while in Chicago. So are you singing now? Do your colleagues in the state Senate know that you sing? What role does singing play in your life, if any, today?
So I think in a way, me singing is probably like my bravest self. And so it's been interesting to clock when in my life I have sang more publicly or externally. And so, yeah, I sang a lot in college and that was so much fun. And I think it brought me community. It brought me a lot of joy. I still sing sometimes, not as often as I'd like, but I think my colleagues are starting to learn that that is a thing that I do, if that makes sense. Shocking for them. And I'm like, that's great. See, you don't know what you got yet. That's amazing. I'll keep pulling out things. And then with my band, I try to perform whenever we get it together to book gigs still. And I think that's important in part because folks have this like image of what they think a senator should be. And then we have the obligations of our job, which if I allow it, will eat up an entire day. And then I'll get home sometimes and go, okay, well, what am I doing for myself that allows me to pour back into the well? And I think singing is like one of those like expedited, like once I do it, I feel so much incredibly better that it always makes you question like, oh, why did we do that more this week? Everyone has like their thing that kind of like speed charges them up. And mine is like being on a stage or singing or being at home and doing that. And so that is the connection to how I take care of myself right now is to give myself that time and try to recharge that way.
What about reading? What role does reading play in your life? Has it historically been important? Is it important today?
Reading, I think historically has always been super important for me. I read a ton in like my early years because we were navigating English as a second language. And so the teacher would say like, you've got to plow through these books and you've got to read. And I would be really like, oh my God, I've got to read these books. Somewhere in there actually really, really loved to read. And so much so that, they sped tracked my way out of English as a second language in the curriculum and was like reading my way through like anything and everything I could find in elementary school and in middle school. So I like developed this like really healthy love of reading. And then now I would think I would define my relationship with reading as like two things. It's predominantly functional. Like we read a lot of briefs, we read a lot of bills. We read a lot of like sub articles about it. So there's that part.
Plot lines and characters aren't
No,
nearly as interesting in a state
it's just
Senate bill.
not. Although, it's kind of in between the lines is where you find the spicy stuff. Ooh, like this is what they meant to say when they said this. That part I grab. But, I think a lot of my reading now, I'm leaning a lot towards fiction these days. And I think it does come from, like exercising the imagination and the creativity or pulling myself out of like a present scenario and reimagining something different. And that's a lot of the role that it played for me when I was a kid as well. Like now some of it the escapism, but some of it is just like getting to think about yourself in a just different scenario and almost role play. Like if this was me and if I was in chapter 21 and this was happening to Graciela, what would she do? Sometimes in order to do something, you have to see it. So you have to see yourself brave or courageous or imaginative or fun or light or all of these things. And so books have always been this conduit to like, how do I put myself in a frame of thinking towards something? So I'm trying to read a lot more from that perspective as of late.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the book that you chose for today. So, give us a little bit of an introduction to the book and what it is and why you chose it.
Yeah, so I chose The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. And in part, I think why it got chosen, one, this is something that in my community spaces and movement spaces, folks have been talking about for a while. And have been saying like, have you read this? There's so many examples and kind of things felt like a portal to this moment. Have you read it? And I was consistently like, no, and I don't know when I'm gonna read it. And then you like Facebook message and I was like, okay, perfect. Like this is the excuse to like finally sit down and start reading it. But all in all, I think why it came to me, and I think now that I've read it, it feels urgent. It felt somewhat prophetic. I can get why folks would say like it's speaking to this moment. And I think the essence of it is really much about asking us to look at the world around us, right? It can feel dystopian for some of us. And the book, in large part, I think the themes of it for me are about survival, about inequity, about kind of like the strength of like your belief system and what do people choose to do when the world is falling apart. But it's basically set in a very future California that has a ton of climate crisis. Economic instability is at an all-time high. You have the failure of the state. You have a lot of violence, and specifically follows Lauren, who's just trying to make it in her daily life when all of these things have become unstable and dangerous. But I think for me, why I wanted to read upon it was folks kept saying, read it and see if you feel as hopeful as we do about the fact that we can shape our way out of something old when things are falling apart, i.e., don't fret. We will build our way out of like anything that comes our way. So it was a beautiful read. I'm curious to hear what you thought.
This is the first book in this podcast series that I had read previously. It's an outstanding book. There are parts of it that I think I liked better on the second read. There are parts of it that I didn't like as much on the second read. First question I want to ask you about this book is, do you think the book, not how you felt about it, but do you think the book itself is optimistic or pessimistic?
I actually think it's profoundly pessimistic, at least like my first read about it in terms of like the situations. But I think
Yeah.
it puts into question, like, I think like the central decision that we all get to make. You can have really, really heavy things. Change is somewhat unavoidable. And like how we make decisions out of that, we get to drive those. So you can have a pessimistic viewpoint that I think is entirely realistic and still find profound hope in that. And that it's actually like even more remarkable that people can hold hope or light when something is that dark and that heavy and that pessimistic. So that's how I hold both of those things, because it actually puts me in marvel of people that I think in a lot of the daily conditions that I've talked about before with you, it can feel profoundly like this is never going to change for me. And then they'll still say, but I hope that one day it will. And the power of that still. So you can hold the both. How we choose to take the pessimism is where the optimism is found, I guess is what I'm trying to say in that. So I see the pessimism. I try to navigate the reality of it, including the ways in which I was reading the book. And I think Lauren, for example, thinking about how I think she navigated a lot of circumstances, she saw it as reality too. And in understanding that reality, you can shape how you want to malleate it and what you want to do out of it.
There's one quote I pulled that I wanted to ask you about from this book. This is pretty early on, and Lauren is the main character in the book. Her father is a very important character in the first half of the book. He says, quote, "It's better to teach people than to scare them. If you scare them and nothing happens, they lose their fear and you lose some of your authority with them. It's harder to scare them a second time, harder to teach them, harder to win back their trust. Best to begin by teaching." When you think about your work in the state Senate, I mean, you can scare people into action, you can teach people into action. How do you think about and balance those?
I think I profoundly am a better teacher than I am a better scarer. I want to bring you an example of a conversation that I had really early on in my term when ICE had just tear gassed the street around our office. And I had a constituent call and she was sobbing. And she was like, "Does this mean that I shouldn't leave my house? What should we do? What are you going to do?" And I listened to her and I kind of like took it down for a second. And then I was like, "What do you want to do? What do we want to do?" And she was like, "Well, I know that I really care about whether my kids get home safely today and whether my neighbors are safe going to school." So I was like, "Why don't we just school watch today? What's your school? I can get neighbors over there." And that was the beginnings of our school watch program that we had in our district for many, many months. And I think it really came out of a frame of, if we're going to do this, we're going to have to do it together. Like, we have to undo this part where you think I'm going to save you because I can't save us.
Mm.
But I can bring folks that I think are amazing and brilliantly minded and community minded together, and we can collectively do some things. And that was the beginnings of like, let me talk you through what I know, what I don't know. Let me validate how scary this is for you. And I'm going to ask you to leave that scary. And now let's take an action. And I guess that's how I try to teach, through uncertainty and through fear, and not use it as an example or as a tool of like my work, but rather I need you to move through that feeling to do something that is good for you, good for your family, good for your community. And I think that, I don't know that that's the best approach for everyone, but for me, that's how I find optimism in my work. It's how I find communal belonging in my work. It's also just how I find capacity building. Because again, if I bring you something really scary and I try to, or bring fear into the tactic and I try to force my way into it, and that's not what you believe, when push comes to shove, you'll peel away from it. Whereas if we've collectively built something that you can find pride in or meaning in and be able to speak to other people, I think we've built something that is like bigger than just our office. And so it takes a lot more work, but I found it to be much more effective for what I'm trying to do.
So you said that you chose this because a lot of people in your district or a lot of people you know had asked you about it, had said it inspired them. What did you think of the book in that way? Did you see why they had recommended it to you? Did it hit in the way that you think they wanted it to hit for you?
I think so. A lot of the folks that gave me the suggestion around the book was, if you keep doing this the way that you're doing it, Graciela, you're going to burn out. And there are a lot of the folks that were really saying like, you need to expand how you think about this moment, because we have this mutual challenge of how do we bring more people into this work to keep each other safe. And I think that speaks to a couple of things, right? Like, change is unavoidable. Is not going to be felt equitably across the board. And so even when things are moving really profoundly fast, we can still do things that are incredibly inclusive in our practice, from how we organize communities to how we're centering those that are the most impacted by like whatever atrocity is happening around us. That balancing of orientation, I think I felt, as one of the themes in the book. The fact that survival is collective, it's not an I sport, right? Like, for us to make it, it has to be in us. And that there's both a need, a functional need, and a beauty and a capacity building that can happen out of that. I think like that I got, belief and imagination. I think maybe before the last 2 years, I would have kind of scoffed it off a little
Mm.
bit, because sometimes in crisis and emergency, I'm so good at a to-do list. I'm like, okay, this, and this person's going to move. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And that's great. And there also still needs to be in the pool of discipline, someone that almost has this like 10,000 foot view and goes, have we tried something different? Have we tried this approach? What can change to make this easier or better or more effective, right? Like, just the ability to see things in a different way and have that be a respected viewpoint, I think is something that I pulled from this. But also like the power of belief, right? That sometimes like when push comes to shove and you're literally getting shoved and you're getting beat and you're getting harassed and you're getting surveilled and you're getting tracked, like, and that's where we were at one point. It was heavy and you're just kind of like in it. You still need to be able to carry on the belief that any of the things that we're doing do drastically improve lives, that we can materially change people's conditions, that we will make it, we will survive, that we will have good that comes out of it, that we will do our best to make people full. Those are really big things to believe. And if you don't hold on to that belief and hold, what are we doing it for? What is the world that comes after that? And I think that reflection I also needed as someone that like my colleagues make fun of me. Like, I promise I am fun. I am fun. I promise.
I even sing.
I can sing sometimes. Like I have fun because in those months I was like, I was the business. I was the business. And we can be the business and we can also create spots of joy and belief because that is how the work keeps going. That is how our survival keeps going. But it's also fundamentally like, I think it brought me to something that I've been reflective of because of the book, but because of other things. Like we can win, the win being survival, but how we win is also equally important in this scenario. Like if we do it together and there's a community that can continue to build and be happy together, that is actually like the biggest North Star that we could have in this scenario. And you can't have that if you've been nasty to each other or it hasn't been fun or, we haven't related in a meaningful way or I don't know your name, those fundamentals. So I think it brought me back to what kind of leader do I want to be in this moment, which I think is like the most externally lovey Pisces leader that I can be. And not just in validation of self, but because it's how I like to relate and be around people. And I can feel what my joy can do in a space if I let it. Like it can warm up a space, it can make it profoundly less scary, it can make it more inviting. And so that's what I'm trying to hold right now in the midst of a lot of the heavy is that all of that is needed. And that's a skill set that when we think about collective survival, we need to elevate like all of the various things that I just lifted up in that example.
I want to ask about one incident very late in the book in which there's a big earthquake. It's California. You grew up in California. You know about
Yes.
California earthquakes. And there are some women who are trapped under some rubble, and the main character and the people she's with go to rescue them, and they get attacked while they're doing this because there are people they're weak in that moment, and other people are trying to take advantage of them. And she says at this point, "Caring will get me killed someday." And I wanted to ask you about that just in terms of you're a deeply caring person. You're a deeply empathetic person. You're somebody who is in this because of your community. Are there challenges that come with that as well? I mean, I'm imagining you've talked a little bit here about like just the depth that you're in your work and and kind of taking care of yourself as well. How do you balance the wanting to care and be empathetic and give yourself fully into this while also recognizing that that brings its own challenges and difficulties?
When being honest, being as caring as I am, it does bring more work. It definitely means that I come to my team and to myself, and I'm like, these are the ideas that I have based on what I'm seeing. And it comes from, I think, a genuine curiosity and care for the conditions that people are going through. And then I think a very profound belief that I can do everything in my power to change them. So the to-do list is really long. The hours are really long. I asked of this team that I have here to do amazing things, and they do. There's points in the year where I will sit and I'll be like, oh, okay, like profoundly exhausted, very happy about what we do, but that doesn't change that fact. And so that part about being this caring will get me killed. I've thought about it as I, ran head into many scenarios in our area as I've gotten shoved by ice, as I've gotten hit by ice, as I've really had to like understand that my title and in those kinds of situations actually means very little to CBP or to Border Patrol or to ICE or to many folks that are doing that work. Doesn't make it less important. And I say that because I think for all of my caring and the heaviness of that caring, I've come to a reckoning that that is still what I deeply believe and want to do and how I want to move around the world. And it puts like such a big responsibility on me then to think about how to be whole as human at the same time that I have to legislate and have a beautiful team and care on people, that I can't be stubborn and allow myself to be cared on. that there are such things as days off, that it is okay to karaoke sometimes, that, I need to find other things that I love and bring me joy. That responsibility, I think, has been equally as hard. And I also think the reason that folks gave me this book, and I think it's because they're saying, like, we want you here for the long haul. This
Mhm.
work to undo much of what is happening around us didn't get here in one generation. And if you expire before you can do the work that you need to do, like, what was it for? And so that's really the message that I'm sitting with is like, we lift big because we work hard at it, but I also care about a lot about how I get there in a way that I don't think I did before this year.
Well, I know that you are a busy, busy woman, and we need to get you out of here in just a moment. There's one last thing that we do on the podcast to wrap up, which is to imagine a beautiful future scenario where you and I get to see one another again someday. I hope soon. Maybe inspired by something in this book. I hope we don't meet one another in a dystopian future where
I don't
gangs.
wanna see you in a dystopian future, but what I wouldn't give to have another walk with you anywhere, but another walk with you around Macfield and feel, like, the dewiness of the grass, like, underneath our steps, and, I know you didn't ask it, but I think why I hope we get to have that moment. Ooh, I wasn't expecting to cry, Doug.
Take your time.
Hmm, thank you for college. I doubt that was a moment that, by all accounts, like, I really didn't think I would make it. We didn't think I would make it. There were a lot of moments in there,
There were times we
and
were worried.
ooh, there were times we were worried. But I think you were, like, one of the very, very formative and early examples in my life of what I think I try to hold in my heart, which is that caring for people is so important, that it can change lives. It can transform what we do around us. And, like, your profound radical care for me has in many ways changed the entire trajectory of for my own life and what I get to do now in service of other people. So just thank you.
Oh my goodness, Graciela, you're making me cry too. You're so welcome. I mean, you changed my life as well. Without you, I don't get to be a posse mentor, and yeah, I don't have those people in my life, and I don't think I have this job. I don't think that I'm on the trajectory I'm on. So we have impacted one another's lives in deep ways, and you are deeply welcome. But I feel similar levels of gratitude. We changed one another's lives in really important and profound ways, and I will always be grateful for that and happy for that. And I always say it, but I deeply mean it this time. Thank you for being my friend.
Thank you for being my friend. And I'm hopeful I get to chat with you sooner than not.
Well, thank you very, very much to my friend, State Senator Graciela Guzman, for coming on the podcast, for choosing a really important and meaningful book, and for being who she is and expressing that to me. That was a very touching and moving end to that episode, not something that I expected, but that I really, really appreciate her expressing. And I feel very similarly towards her in terms of the impact that she's had on my life. And I'm so excited for her and how she gets to help create good in the world through her role in Illinois state government. Please follow Doug Reads with Friends on social media. I am on TikTok, and I am on Instagram, and I am on Facebook. If you've got any comments or questions or feedback on Doug Reads with Friends, it's pretty easy. Just send me an email at dougreadswithfriends@gmail.com. Music for Doug Reads with Friends provided by my friend, Aaron Caffel. Aaron is a wonderful and deeply talented musician and author, and I am greatly appreciative of her allowing me to use her work here on the podcast. So thank you, Erin, and please check out her work on Spotify. Okay, that's it for today's episode of Doug Reads with Friends. Here's my only request. Send this podcast to one person, someone who would love this book or someone you've been meaning to reconnect with. Books can bring us together, but the conversations are what keep us there. Thanks for being my friend. I'll see you next time.